we've got some time. We've got about 20 minutes, I think, for questions. So I'd like to thank the panelists for some really interestingly overlapping and mutually kind of informing issues around both what might be there, the depth of what might be there if only we could see it all, and the kind of challenges and opportunities to realise those depths and bring them forward. Can I ask if anyone's got any questions? Yes? Yep. Lillian first. There is a microphone behind you.
Deaf, so if you can help me.
Okay.
What is that?
For tall people.
Yes, so I know. I have I guess, a technical question for Mr. Laird with about the digitization of the material. So you said it goes to York, and what exactly comes back? Like at what level of what's the level of and size and type of digital file that comes back?
What kind of files come back from York when they're digitized? Its size and type.
Okay. What I specified what kind of files our standard was a QuickTime movie file, and from which is equivalent in quality to the tape that's being sent, because you understand a lot of the tapes are they're not like high definition tapes that we see nowadays. They're very low definition, but we get a QuickTime movie file. It's not very compressed, but from that you can convert into all sorts of different files for web use or whatever purpose. But that's, to answer your question, I had requested at the beginning, and we still maintain QuickTime movie files of exactly the same dimensions that the original tapes are in, and the same kind of quality as well.
Yes. There's one more, and then yeah.
Hello. Just a few questions. I'm at an institution in New York City, and as a result of that, I run into a lot of Caribbean writers who are living in the diaspora. And I was talking with a woman who had emigrated from Trinidad to New York City as a teenager. And I asked her, she's published several volumes of poetry, what she was doing with her archive, because I was coming to this conference and workshop. And she was giving it to the Schomburg Center in New York City. And I asked her why she hadn't thought of sending her papers to the Caribbean, and it seemed as if it hadn't even occurred to her. So I'm wondering if, and this is my real question and request, is there a way that we can generate a list of acquisitions people at Caribbean institutions, both that academics could refer writers to and the writers themselves could consult, so that more Caribbean institutions can have papers from the diaspora? Thank you.
We didn't hear that very well up here, but I'm just going to repeat it so that Ken and Chris can hear. She was basically saying that she's based in New York, and recently met, I think you said, a Trinidadian woman, a poet, who is now based in New York and has published several volumes of poetry, and passed on the news that she was about to donate her material to the Schomburg Center in New York. And so the question came up, why don't you think about giving this material to an institution in the Caribbean? And the poet basically said it had never occurred to her. So I suppose the question is, how do we make it more widely known, not just within the region, but elsewhere in kind of diaspora communities, that there are institutions here in the Caribbean that are willing and able to preserve that kind of material. Even if there are not many, there are still a few key ones. And so I suppose that comes back to the idea that Alison and I raised of having a register not just of the locations of archives, but a register of institutions. So you know, okay, these are the 12 regional institutions that actually have special collections for this kind of material. These are the facilities they have. This is what they already own. So you can see the context of where your papers might be going. So if it comes to St. Augustine, it's going to be with material from Lovelace and Walcott and CLR James, etc., etc. And also information about accessibility, so that a writer who has a big grap of material and is trying to figure out what to do with it can make some informed decisions about what the options are. But I think that's an important thing, that information has to circulate outside of the Caribbean as well, because there's so many Caribbean people and there's so much Caribbean material elsewhere. Do you want to add anything to that, Ken?
Yes, I think one of the it's a bit invidious, but not everybody's manuscript is going to be purchased. So we really have to set up a scheme whereby everybody has an opportunity to deposit their stuff with some organization. If they think they're a hotshot writer and they want to sell, they try to sell. But if nobody approaches you and says, well, I know I love your work, I want to publish, I want your manuscript for such and such a library, then we should let people know. And it's very important for us here. I mean, I don't think a foreign university would be interested in the manuscript of one of our lesser writers. But we are, because they're all part of the inventory of who we are and how we became what we are. So we have to make openings for people who are not well-known and established writers to deposit those materials. So I don't know this lady that you're talking about, right? I don't know if she's a major writer.
Oh, yeah. I don't know what it is. Maybe over lunch you'll whisper the name into Ken's ear and he'll promise never to tell anybody, except me.
Yeah.
Other questions, David? Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to ask a very particular question of Professor Ramchand, who raised a point in his presentation but then didn't have time to develop it. It's about this difference between poets' revisions and novelists' revisions. Now, that's the first time I've ever heard that point made, and once you've made it, it's completely clear what you're saying. But does it have implications for us as collectors? And could I ask you just to say a little bit more about that distinction between poets' revisions and novelist revisions, and what we should think about as collectors in terms of that?
I think it is part of an argument for using the manuscripts and the ways in which manuscripts can be used, instead of just an old scholar poring over it and trying to decipher and see how it relates to the text. You can do serious critical work about genres, the difference between genres, right? How is poetry different from prose fiction? So critical studies can feed in on the manuscripts in more than just the conventional way. That's one of the things I was saying. But roughly, when you look at a poem, sometimes the writer changes a word. And he doesn't change the word necessarily for content. He changes the word because of the sound. He may, or the tone, or the texture, or whatever. Some of a poet's changes are more related to how the air got it than in a prose writer. A prose writer, when he changes a word, that is the least important of the changes he's making, unless he's a short story writer. But a novelist is going to shift chapters around. He's going to change characters. He's going to go into a different narrating technique at a certain point. Because of the scope and the dimension of the novel, there are a whole range of changes that the novelist carries out. But with the poet, he might decide, I don't like this stanza, or I'm going to change put different feet in the lines, or I'm going to go for the long cadence and forget the lines, or whatever. But the changes are of a different kind from the changes in the novel. And I would say the fundamental distinction is the air. Many of the poet's changes have to do with the air. I'm talking about in the modern period. A long narrative poem obviously will have changes that have to do with telling the story and so. Modern poems, I think it's words and how it strikes the air. I mean, there was a version of a Derek Walcott line, which I can't remember exactly, but it was talking about what a mess we've made of independence. And in the early version of the poem, it says, to the effect, it was better in the old days when Queen Victoria so and so. A later version says, was it better in the old days? And so, my God, I would like to see the manuscript of that, to see what he had in the manuscript, you know. And I think the manuscript would have said it was better. It would have been a statement about how we failed and so fed up with us, and maybe we should go back to British colonial rule. But later on, after having been attacked all over the place, he said, let me play it safe, and asked, was it better?
Ken?
Can you hear me okay?
That's
All right. Three points going in different directions. First of all, as a fiction editor in the past myself and a fiction writer, so I've been on both ends of the editorial process. I'm just urging all collectors of literary archives to bear in mind that the communication between editor and writer is critical in any assessment of the development of a manuscript. The negotiations, not only Ken mentioned in terms of trying to reach an international audience, that's one aspect of it, but just negotiations, creative negotiations, where an editor may feel that a particular character is acting out of character, and you know, there may sometimes be rather passionate exchanges between editor and writer. So I'm just saying that that sort of archival material is really of critical importance in understanding the development of material. Secondly, I'm really happy to hear that most of the writers who were surveyed were not interested in financial remuneration, because to be honest, up to this point, I have been distressed at the loss of a lot of material to the first world moneyed institutions which just cannot compete. For example, Louise Bennett papers that are now housed in Canada. I think it's McMaster, I believe, university has it. There was no way that Jamaica could possibly offer anything comparable to what McMaster offered. And so Louise Bennett is our icon in terms of the Jamaican language. Her material is lost to Jamaica. So that's another reality. I think at the moment I'm suspecting that Trinidad may be the only Caribbean territory that actually has the money to be able to purchase valuable literary archives.
We may have the money, but we sitting at this table don't decide how to spend it, unfortunately.
And the third point is perhaps anecdotal in a sense. I had two experiences recently dealing with colleagues. One was a scholar who came out from London, from England, to Jamaica, researching W. Adolph Roberts, who is a seminal figure, yet, or should be regarded as a seminal Jamaican literary figure, but has been somewhat undervalued by many, if not most, people. And he was trying to go through the boxes and boxes in the Institute of Jamaica, trying to find out what material there was on Roberts. And sadly, it was a very frustrating experience for him because there was no systematic cataloging of the material. He was going through boxes that probably had never been opened from when they were deposited. And secondly, a relative of mine was the granddaughter of a Jamaican intellectual who was now undertaking the onerous task of going through her grandmother's papers with a view of donating them either to the Institute, to the National Library, or to the National Archives. And she was doing this very nervously because she had been told stories of things getting lost, things getting stolen, misplaced, etc., etc. And so she, in the end, well, there is no end yet because she was about to package this stuff and hand it all over to the National Library when she was told she should think about this really carefully because maybe the systems are not yet in place to be able for them to handle and receive this material and treat it with the respect that it is due. So I just want to point out that we have some ways to go in terms of getting our Caribbean systems in place.
Yeah, I just wanted to reply to this. The things being lost applies particularly to the manuscript, the actual manuscripts from the Stone Age, and it's a grievous thing because the other day I was doing some research on Mitterholz's My Bones and My Flute, and I wanted to see whether the purported diary one referred to in the novel actually existed. And I wanted to see the Mitterholz's diaries. Do you know that they've been stolen from Guyana? They were deposited there by Michael Gilks with the permission of Mitterholz's wife, and they've just disappeared. On the other side, do you all know that a manuscript by Claude Mackay, dated 1941, has been found recently, so that the Claude Mackay opus has expanded by one book. Before he died, Roy Heath gave me the copy of The Shadow Bride because we'd been talking about it and I told him how I loved it and so on. And now I have it sitting at home and I know it should go to Guyana. I wanted to go to Guyana, but I have to go to Guyana first and see that they can take care of it and that nobody will thief it or that termites can't get at it and so on. But it's by me, and they could get at it there too. It needs to go somewhere where it can be preserved, and you're right. The institutions really have to set about making sure that they are proper repositories of this kind of heritage.
The only other thing I would say to that is, and again, one of the suggestions that Alison and I had come up with, practical suggestions, is that we need some way to kind of, we need some way for people to be informed about what each institution has, and in terms of not just its collection, but its resources, what it has and what it can do. Hence the idea of a series of benchmarks. You can know very clearly if you're a writer or a writer's heirs, estate, someone who has material to donate, not just know that the institution is willing to receive the material, but what their resources are once they've received it. What are the storage conditions, security conditions? Do they have librarians and archivists on staff who know how to deal with material like this? And so you can be fairly sure that it will still be there 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 100 years from now.
Yeah, my presentation tomorrow is really titled Hidden Collections. And in response to Kim, actually, there is a Louise Bennett collection at the National Library of Jamaica. I have actually worked with it, and all her scripts from program, Miss Lou's program that used to come on at 12 o'clock on a weekday. They have all of those scripts. They have, I counted, 50 boxes. 50 boxes of material. When Miss Lou was migrating, she was concerned about what would happen to her papers. And John Aarons went up to her house and just packed everything willy-nilly into 50, not archival boxes. These are boxes that we normally pack chicken in. So they are large boxes. And they are actually sitting at the National Library. And I had offered, I got a sabbatical 1 year from UWI. But all I could do in the 1 year was the Miss Lou's views and the predecessor programs to it. But there's a lot of institutional politics involved in these things, so that Miss Lou's papers are at the National Library in 50 boxes, awaiting somebody to come and sort them out. They have tapes too, actually. And Mrs. Maureen Webster Prince, who is actually working on the project at Government Information Services here, was instrumental in getting me to come down there to work with the Louis Bennett archives. The Walter Adolph Roberts archives were earmarked for cataloging, but nothing has been done. They're sitting there. But tomorrow, when I talk about these hidden archives, some more information will come out.
Very quickly, Alison, could you expand a little bit? I just didn't get one of the points that you were making on the list of possible considerations, and it had to do with specific intertexts. What specific intertexts operate regionally? And the second question is for all of you, really. When Ken said there about we need to have every single writer, regardless of whether they're going to be paid for their collection or not, we need to have all of the writers' materials lodged, because that's part and parcel of our literary development. But that's not practical, is it? If every writer who decided that they were a writer, and we know that there are plenty of them around, offered their extensive boxes of collections to the UWI library for free, I mean, you know, we'd be out the door with boxes. So, I mean, it's a difficult question to raise when we're all very committed to this, but where do you draw the line, or what has to be the criteria that are put in place in making the decision to accept or not to accept? So one specific and one more general question.
Well, if he's very old, you wait for him to die before you catalog it. But seriously, some of them may not be major writers, but they're worth keeping, we would agree. I know that there are some that are quite worthless. I suppose the compromise would be to photograph them. They don't take up as much space as hold them electronically. But we'll come back to...
Sorry, on the specific one, what I was really thinking of is if we are going to try and produce this booklet of advice for writers, and we might kind of say to them, you know, keep your correspondence with editors, with agents, with publishers, keep track of your library, you know, what you were reading, but also whether there are other things, whether keep a track of whether you went to Carnival, whether you went to, you know, so I was thinking, you know, in terms of thinking about how literary culture here, as we've all been saying, is so much part of a syncretic kind of cultural formation that's so influenced by the oral, by the visual, by the performative, that actually we might need to really think about that in terms of really being, if we are able to kind of give advice now, kind of foresight, then maybe we can think about all of capturing some of those networks and influences which are much wider than perhaps a more traditional guidance on a kind of what a literary archive or a set of kind of literary influences may look like. On the other one, I'm not answering that one. I'm going to let these.
No, I was going back to that one. Actually, you have an option to say no, thank you. Okay? when somebody brings a manuscript and you never heard about him, you could say, well, look, we will look at the stuff and see whether we want it. And then you say, no, thank you. Yeah. He said no.
There's two more questions. I think we've got. How are we doing with time?
It's about 5:30 now.
Okay, the last couple of questions.
Well, it's not really a question. It might be rather a comment on the presentations of the first panelists and that on video also. Well, I would like to say from Marcus's point of view, so there were very interesting proposals that were raised there, and some of them will be addressed tomorrow in the presentation I will do about the project we have in the Caribbean about the new project. And I understand what, so one of the suggestions is, of course, that we need a lot of advocacy about our institutions, because some of them are really in full condition to receive important records to be preserved. And so, of course, everything that researchers can do to bridge, as you suggested, would be most welcome. And if you have any suggestions for us to present, for instance, our institutions, because on the web portal we have a directory which is very standardized kind of format, but maybe there would be even more things to make them more attractive, and we would be very interested on having suggestions to do that. So thank you very much for your help. And also, well, from the Martinican point of view, also, well, last year at the workshop we had at the UMEX, the issues that were raised in the presentation about collecting these writers by Mr. Ramachan and Mr. Martin were raised also when I tried to make a small inquiry about 20th century Martinican writers. But, well, these were deceased writers, so I think the suggestion of inquiring about living writers also. But as you know, some of our writers are very well known. They are translated, and they have a feeling of their international, global. And so this is one issue also. In the question, financial or the nationalist, I would say, or cultural identity, orientation, to choose where they would put their records. I think there is also that vision that even if they claim their identity, they also have in scope that idea of touching a wider public. And I think this is very attractive for them to have their archive at the National Library of France, for instance. And sometimes, even if they do claim they are Martinican and they want, some of them would be more interested in being, more valorized in a more prestigious institution. And also for the video, Mr. Lear, I think your initiative is very, very interesting, and I noted that you had an interview by Mr. Césaire, and I would like to bring them back.
But I must say that the UWI is a very prestigious institution. Eh?
Yeah.
And,
One of the practical steps that perhaps might be looked at is a clearinghouse process. This exists outside the world of literary archives, but is very common in historical archives, where the agency, the collecting agencies, actually agree who might be the best, where the best move might be. And that prevents, first of all, embarrassing fights between institutions, and that's a good thing. But it also means that where there might not be a market for that particular manuscript or author, there's still a proper home for it. And I think that where you're talking about a consortium of equals, where the agencies are not necessarily in one country, and the amongst the collectors, and it requires levels of maturity. I speak as an archivist. It requires levels of maturity that are enriching once you've let go of particular issues. So that's one point. The second point, it's about the bad literary archives. Remember that they can have huge historical importance. So they might not be interesting as a literary document, but they might actually be very interesting historical accounts. And so the perspective needs to be broad and needs to take into account other factors and not just the literary significance of the item.
Thank you. Thank you for being so concise. Maybe there is time for, have you got one last question?
Yeah, I was really kind of interested, well, in part because I work on literary papers, but not literary papers as such, but publishing archives. And I was really interested in this whole description you have of the ecosystem now, the literary ecosystem is coming into being. So the question is really quite simple. It's, are there measures to keep up with archiving the particular institutions that support that kind of literary ecosystem, Focus or Calabash? On all that would be really important, because I found going back to the arts of an island when I was writing a little piece on print cultures of the Caribbean. I found that really useful.
I suppose this is mine to answer. Well, I mean, I think that depends on the individual institutions. And I suppose just as one of the purposes of our questionnaire was to get writers thinking about these issues, perhaps we need to do the same thing with, with Caribbean publishers, newspapers, magazines, festivals, writing programs, and everyone else involved in the process. Critics. No one yet has asked Ken what he's planning to do with his archive. He's going. Maybe one of you will be brave enough to do that. I mean, speaking for myself, I was talking to Gail before this started, so she kind of knows what I'm going to say. I told her that I'm a great pack rat and I don't throw things away. So even if, let's say, the festival that I work for, the Bocas Lit Fest, does not have a particularly organized archive in the sense that there isn't a filing cabinet in our office with the definitive set of anything in it. So our archive, such as it exists, is in my inbox and hard drive, and in the inboxes and hard drives of my various colleagues. And then we each have a private little accumulation of stuff that we're still hanging on to. I certainly do think of why it's important to hang on to it. I have a designated box at home in my office that's the festival box, and I make sure I keep at least one copy of everything we print, of press clippings, of anything that I think might be of value to someone later on. I mean, I'm working very hard to keep this festival going, and I hope it'll be going long term. And I want 50 years from now for some researcher to be able to come along and say, yes, you did a great job, and I've got the evidence to say so, because you've held on to all the material. So I agree with you. I have a stake in this. I'm not, but whether other institutions and other projects are doing the same thing, I don't have a clue, but maybe that's something we need to get them to think about.
I agree absolutely, Gail, but I have to say that I was slightly kind of distressed when I was looking for Caribbean women's writers in their archives, that I found out that the Association of Caribbean Women Writers has preserved their archive at Florida International University. But apart from Jean Rees and Louise Bennett, I don't think there are any actual Caribbean women's writers' archives. So it's really kind of interestingly kind of uneven, and I think some kind of sense of what is there and what we could do about it would really help to awaken, more parties to all of this. But yes, definitely festival organisers should keep archives. Okay, thank you all very. Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to say that in the next couple of days I'll be walking around trying to find out from people what is your response to my chauvinist attitude about repatriation of manuscripts. What kind of negotiation can we go into, and what kind of price should we be willing to pay to repatriate manuscripts? And the second one is the legislative avenue, whether there isn't a case for pronouncing certain things national treasures and saying that they cannot leave the country. So I'd like to hear what people think about things like that.
Okay, before we go to lunch, can I just say, it's been a huge privilege for us to have presentations. All three of our speakers are incredibly professionally busy and prestigious, and it's really a thrill and delight that they were able to come this morning. We just say a final thank you to them.